Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel, and in this video, if you don't mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about my atheism, because I notice as new people start watching my videos, I get comments from people who are evidently Jehovah's Witnesses who've just stumbled on my channel, and inevitably the question gets asked, yes, but what are your beliefs now? What religion are you now? And one or two people have expressed an interest in what my beliefs are. And those of you who know I'm an atheist have asked the question, or some of you have, why did you become an atheist? And I guess I recoil a little bit at that question. I mean, it's a decent enough question. It's a perfectly normal question that you might ask an atheist, but I kind of reject the wording a little bit, because I don't consider myself to have become an atheist. I consider myself to have reverted to atheism. I think that all people are born atheists. When you're born, you don't have a theology in your mind, do you? All you're bothered about is eating, drinking, playing, pooping, sleeping. That's your life, isn't it? For, let's say, the first 3, 4, maybe 5 years. You're not thinking about, oh, where have I come from? And, oh, actually, these are the answers. The one and only true answers of where humanity comes from. Nonsense. You're not interested in any of that as a child. It has to be, well, it has to be stuffed down your throat by your parents or by the people who are raising you. That's why I'm so against child indoctrination. And child indoctrination is arguably one of the things that gets me most riled when I'm doing my rebuttals to the JW Broadcasting episodes produced by Jehovah's Witnesses. Because repeatedly, month after month, you'll see somewhere or other an example of child indoctrination, or Jehovah's Witness parents being reminded to indoctrinate their children or their young ones. I was handicapped, from my earliest years intellectually with these silly ideas that seriously set me back in life. Now, when it comes to my own past, I can afford to be a little bit philosophical, because it turns out that my Jehovah's Witness upbringing and my Jehovah's Witness experience put me personally in a situation where I can possibly contribute something and I can possibly help others. But I don't expect everyone with a Jehovah's Witness background to look at things that way. And I can imagine some wishing that their parents hadn't filled their minds with that sort of nonsense. But when you think about it, that's how religion works. It's not just Jehovah's Witnesses. All religions, if you think about it, rely on children's minds being stuffed full of unprovable teachings. That's what child indoctrination is. So when I'm asked, why did you become an atheist? Again, I don't see it as becoming an atheist. I see it as reverting to the atheism that I was born with. I wasn't born with the idea of there being a God. I wasn't born with the idea that the Bible is God's inspired word, brimming with divine wisdom. That was all stuff that I had to be told. And it wasn't just suggested to me. It wasn't a case of, oh, well, this might be the case, Lloyd. Who knows? It was a case of, no, this really is God's inspired word. And actually, the religion that you happen to have been born into by a pure lottery of birth happens to be God's one and only true religion. Lucky you. and everyone else is wrong. So when you see a scientist on television talking about evolution, he's wrong or she's wrong. You know better than they do. Or when you see an archaeologist on television talking about the fact that there simply could not have been a flood, a Noah's flood that encompassed the whole earth, they're wrong. You know more than they do. If they only knew what you know, they would be saying something entirely different. And so you grow up with this very pious, very condescending view that yours is the only truth, that lucky you've just happened to have been born by the grace of God or whatever into what just happens to be the one true religion. And so returning to the question, let's call it reverting. Why did you revert to atheism? I think is a more accurate question, although I'm not going to feel insulted if you say, why did you become an atheist? I'm just trying to make the point here. Why did you revert to atheism, Lloyd? Well, because I did research. I was a devout, believing Jehovah's Witness who, through an unlikely series of events that wasn't planned, was quite unexpected. I write about all this in my book. I found myself in a strange country where I couldn't understand the language. I was going to the weekly meetings at the Kingdom Hall, and this constant barrage of indoctrination no longer had me in its grip because I couldn't understand it. So I was sitting there. For the first time, I was thinking, well, hang on, what do I believe? Never mind what I'm supposed to believe. What do I believe? And it very, very quickly became obvious that this was a belief system that I felt compelled to buy into, rather than a belief system that I was genuinely and honestly persuaded by. So when I started doing the research and I started doing the digging and I read Crisis of Conscience and I went on JW Facts, everything just unraveled. The whole thing just disintegrated. And all of a sudden, you have to figure out what life's all about. Your entire perception of reality gets turned on its head. It's a very terrifying thing, by the way. That's why I call my book The Reluctant Apostate. No one goes into this process thinking, yay, I want to have my whole sense of reality turned on its head. I want to doubt everything. All of the things that I cherish, I want to get rid of. No one thinks that when they go into this. Everyone thinks, I'm going to prove my beliefs right, because they've got to be right. But my beliefs were wrong. And having proven that my beliefs as a Jehovah's Witness were wrong, the logical thing was to then ask the question, well, might Christianity as a belief system also be wrong? Might the project of religion be inherently flawed in some way? So I didn't just go from Jehovah's Witness atheist, go to bed one night as a Jehovah's Witness, wake up the next morning, hey, I'm an atheist. There was a transitional period where I was no longer a Jehovah's Witness. I'd rejected those beliefs, but I still assumed that there was a God, and I still assumed that that God was in some way attached roughly to the framework of Christianity. So I was what you might call a skeptical Christian. I can remember one of the last things to go in terms of religious rituals was praying. And I was even praying at McDonald's. If we went for a McDonald's or something, or we went to a restaurant, I'd still be offering a sneaky prayer while I thought the waiters weren't looking or whatever. I've been raised to think that it's good to be appreciative and grateful. That's kind of part of my upbringing. So I always just assumed, well, regardless of what your relationship is with God, it's just nice to say thank you to someone. So praying at restaurants was the last thing to go. And I suppose it was watching the YouTube videos of Christopher Hitchens that really sealed the deal for me. Because that man, obviously now dead, the way he explained things, it was like a breath of fresh air. I'd spent my entire life being spoken to as a child by my religion. If you don't know what I'm talking about, watch a JW Broadcasting episode, the ones I do rebuttals to. Notice how the presenters speak down to Jehovah's Witnesses and talk to them as though they're children. So I'd had a lifetime of being spoken to as though I was an imbecile. And here was a guy who was finally talking to me like an adult, who obviously knew a lot and had a very engaging, very charismatic, very witty way of placing his knowledge in my head. And yeah, it was, I don't know which video it was, I can't tell you all of that. I just know that it was Hitch. It was Hitch that helped me get rid of the last vestiges of theism that were in my head. Then I did lots more reading, and to begin with, I was identifying as an agnostic, and I think my first video along those lines was why I'm an agnostic. And now I call myself an atheist. And, well, first of all, I call myself an agnostic atheist. I'll try to explain this briefly. So, agnostic atheist, beginning with a G, would be an atheist who asserts there is no God. I know that there's no God, so that's why I don't believe in God. That's what agnostic atheist says. I haven't actually met any agnostic atheist, although I'm assured they do exist. Most of the atheists I meet, are like me, an agnostic atheist. In other words, we take the position, we can't prove that there isn't a God, but to suggest that there is one and that this God is intervening in human affairs is an extraordinary claim, and extraordinary claims require evidence. Show us the evidence and we'll believe. Until then, our default position must be atheism, which is lack of belief. So agnostic or Gnosticism deals with what you know, and theism or atheism deals with what you believe. And there's an argument to be made that everyone is an agnostic. Because even if you are the most fervent religious believer, you can't really know most of the things that you believe. Well, if not all of the things that you believe, because it's all based on faith, really, isn't it? It's not based on things that you can tangibly prove. You are believing, you're taking a leap of faith in saying many of the things and believing many of the things that you believe. So hence you are an agnostic theist, I would suggest, if you're a believer. But I don't want to offend anyone. I'm just putting it out there that there's a case to be made for everyone, really, being an agnostic. Clearly, though, not everyone is an atheist. And perhaps this is a good point at which to reassert that I don't expect everyone who watches my channel to be an atheist. I'm not really in the business of persuading people towards atheism. Now, obviously, I do have things to say about atheism. And I have, for example, made appearances on the Atheist Experience, will hopefully continue to do so. However, that doesn't mean that I necessarily am in the business of turning everyone into atheists. I think that that's a journey, that's an incredibly personal journey that everyone should make for themselves. I can't decide for someone else what their belief should be. That's really their business, isn't it? So what you'll find if you follow my channel is that I do occasionally work in my atheism into what I'm talking about, especially when I'm doing rebuttals to Jehovah's Witness videos. I'll explain why they don't make sense, not just because they're internally inconsistent, but also because they contradict science, because they contradict scholarship, they contradict archaeology. So I'm interested in applying my skepticism as an atheist to Jehovah's Witness materials. I will also quite often quote from the Bible, because even though I no longer consider the Bible to be God's inspired, inerrant word, for reasons that I've gone into in some depth in other videos, it just so happens by happy coincidence that the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses are also unbiblical, so they also contradict the Bible. So don't get confused when you see me quoting from the Bible and think, this must be a Christian, this must be a believer. No, you can actually approach the Bible as a book of historical and religious significance without believing that it was inspired by an all-seeing, all-knowing deity who is shaping and intervening in human history and affairs. But that's pretty much all I wanted to say, really. I don't know whether I'll need to keep doing these videos every now and then, but hopefully you found it an interesting discussion of my beliefs and of my past. Don't forget that you can enjoy more of these videos by subscribing to the John Cedars channel. And as always, thank you for watching.